In today's video, for the spirit of spooky season and Halloween, I wanted to go over the 5 creepiest and scariest quests featured in the Elder Scrolls 4, Oblivion. To be frank, given this game's age and the current fanbase for it, I doubt any of these quests would get the heart racing and skin crawling like they would have back in the day. So that's the angle I want to approach it from, the perspective of a new player embarking on these journeys for the first time. All of these quests have been covered in length and detail on this channel already, so the structure for these 5 spooky quests will be a little different. I'll give a brief synopsis for each one, and then go over some subjective reasons as to why I think they're scary. So sit back, relax, and let's take a listen into these frightening tales. The first scary quest on today's list is Where Spirits Have Lease. This adventure begins in the city of Anvil. Travelers are likely to hear the rumor that Velwyn Benaris is selling his grandfather's manor for a modest sum of 5,000 gold. Deciding to buy it off of him, the player goes to their new home and sees that it's certainly a fixer-upper. It has good bones, but it's been long since abandoned and run down. Thinking it best to rest after a long day's journey, the player sleeps in their newly acquired bed, only to be awoken by the terrifying sight of vengeful spirits. You fight for your life, warding off the evil within, and before fleeing, notice a skeletal hand lying next to a scrap of paper from Lorgren Benaris' diary. Reading it, it details that Velwyn's grandfather was a sinister and corrupt man, delving too far into the practices of necromancy. He created a secret lair within the basement that only a Benaris can open. With the new discovery made, the player rushes back to the Count's arms in order to locate Velwyn, but learns he's since fled to the Imperial City to enjoy his riches. Following in his footsteps, you locate him at the King and Queen Tavern. There, it's revealed that Velwyn knew of the curse and evil that lies within the manor, but just wanted to be rid of it. He ultimately feels guilty about the sale and wants to make amends. He travels with you back to Anvil, and together, the two of you fight your way through the lowly spirits and make your way down to the basement. Upon opening the portal to the secret lair, Velwyn runs away in fear and leaves you alone to face whatever lies ahead. Inside of the room, the player approaches an altar that contains the skeleton of Lorgren. Activating it, Lorgren speaks to you in quite the terrifying manner. Although he sounds scary, he says he wishes to atone for his sins. He asks you to connect his missing hand with the rest of his body so that he may move on into the afterlife. Doing so, it turns out to be a trick, and Lorgren rises from the dead in the form of a powerful lich. From here, the player is forced to fight him, eventually overcoming the challenge and finally putting an end to Lorgren's madness. Once all is said and done, you return back to the Count's arms where Velwyn shows his gratitude and thanks. The two of you part ways, and upon returning back to the manor, you discover that it's been cleaned, furnished, and spruced up. It's a beautiful home to live in now, except for the fact that Lorgren's magical lair will always be beneath it, reminding you and everyone of his evil atrocities and what he was able to become. Where Spirits Have Lease is such a fantastically spooky quest, as it has elements of surprise and built-up tension within it. Upon just looking at the manor and hearing the rumors surrounding it, you get a feel that something isn't quite right. Entering inside, the strange feeling worsens as it's clearly been abandoned and there's a negative energy about it. The first night's rest is arguably the rising action for this quest, as the spirits ambush and attack you. Then, finding out about Lorgren's true nature, how he really died, what he did in life, and what's become of him now, continues to strengthen the story. The climax and scariest part of all is coming face to face with Lorgren himself. The idea of him becoming a lich, his appearance, his voice, his strength, it all creates the perfect enemy to be fearful of. Where Spirits Have Lease definitely deserves a spot in the spookiest quests of this game. The next quest on this list today is Verminsdric Shrine quest. This creepy journey begins at her shrine, which is just southwest of Shadenhall. The player must be at least level 5 to begin. Speaking with one of her followers, Amar Duar, he says that Vermina requires a black soul gem in order to gain her audience. Retrieving one and gifting it to her, she begins to speak and says that a wizard named Arkved has wronged her. He stole an artifact from her dream world and has since been punished. The part she'd like help with is retrieving her orb from his wizard tower. His tower is located due south of the shrine, and from the outside, seems like a perfectly normal fort. Even entering into the first area, everything seems fine and as it should be. It's when the player delves a little further in that it begins to get interesting. It starts off with furniture on the ceiling and oversized goods. The charm quickly ends there though when the halls and rooms become more disturbing and unsettling. Blood is sprayed all over the walls, the rooms are dark and barely lit with red lighting, bodies are dismembered and thrown about on the floors and walls. One section even contains an isolated island surrounded by lava, with nothing else in sight. On top of all this, there are powerful Daedric enemies at every turn, actively fighting against you and trying to add your corpse to the pile. Soon, the player comes across Arkved's chambers and sees the wizard in an eternal slumber. Grabbing the orb, you stumble across the notes and writings of his last waking moments. Arkved knows what he's done and thinks that he's gotten away with it. The notes turn more and more sour as he slowly begins to realize the hold that Vermina has over him, and the ways in which he'll be tormented. The final note showcases his fearful and scared demeanor by simply reading, "The horror, the horror." Leaving his tower and returning back to Vermina, she rewards you with a unique Daedric artifact, and Arkved is never spoken about or touched upon again. Vermina's Daedric Shrine quest was the first video ever covered on this channel, and at the time, my first time ever going through it. It builds the suspense perfectly by showcasing the horrors and dangers within the tower, and then upping the stakes and the disturbing content with each turn. The body parts and sprayed blood are certainly a shocker upon first viewing. I remember Arkved's retreat being the zone that took me aback the most, a never-ending void of strung up and burning bodies. To think that Arkved's nightmares and darkest thoughts are manifesting themselves in the tower, and Vermina's influence over him is only growing. Then, to wonder about what Arkved is experiencing at the current moment, as well as his thoughts just before being taken into eternal slumber, are chilling to say the least. I can only help but wonder how much more twisted and darkened his tower will become before Vermina decides to move on from torturing him, if ever. The third spooky quest on today's list is A Shadow over Hackdir. This quest begins in the city of Coral. A young Argonian woman named Dharma comes up to the player and introduces herself. She then goes off on her daily tasks, and you with yours. A few days later, the topic of Dharma pops up among the citizens, and rumor has it that she's gone missing. Speaking with her mother, Seed at the Northern Goods and Trade, she'll explain what's happened. Dharma went on a delivery to the nearby settlement of Hackdir and hasn't returned. You're asked to go and investigate to see what's happened or where she could have gone afterwards. Arriving in the small village, it's obvious that things here are quite strange. Half of the buildings are burnt down and destroyed, and the few citizens that are left are highly suspicious and hostile towards outsiders. Asking around town, everyone claims that Dharma never showed up to complete the delivery. Their story starts to fall apart though when evidence surfaces of her having stayed in the town. Her horse, Blossom, can be found hidden in one of the burnt down houses, and her diary is located in one of the dressers at the local inn. During the investigation, mutated men known as the Brethren begin to appear and attack you. Events and feelings are slowly escalating between the player and the citizens. One of them though, a young man named Jiv, pulls you aside and fills you in on the details here. Hackdir is actually home to a cult of worshippers who praise these unknown beings called the Deep Ones. The Legion had already tried to deal with this town long ago, but they rebuilt and continued with their rituals. The Brethren are the members who have changed the most, and have gone underground to be closer to the Deep Ones. The cult is going to sacrifice Dharma in an attempt to regain contact with the entities. He then directs the player into the caverns, where you'll find Dharma locked in a cage. Freeing her, the two of you sneak your way out of town, avoiding getting caught by the Brethren or the locals. Once far away, Dharma splits off and meets you back in town. Seed is thankful for her daughter's return and rewards you accordingly. There's also a timeline in the story where Dharma is killed during the escape, and you return to her mother in order to deliver the grave news. A Shadow over Hackdir has been discussed many times at length on this channel. It's one of my favorite quests, and I believe it to be very deserving of a spot on the spooky list. For starters, this quest is entirely based off of the book The Shadow over Innsmouth, written by H.P. Lovecraft. It in of itself was intended to be a horror novella. Regardless of its origins, the mystery and setup behind it all is simply perfect. A kind and friendly young woman goes missing at the nearby strange and inhospitable town. You go to investigate and all of the residents resent and hate you. They deny claims of her ever being there, which only makes the tale even more suspicious. After finding her belongings, the story only strengthens and the knot in your stomach tightens. Hearing about the lore of the Deep Ones and having the Brethren surprise attack you in the night are enough to make the player walk around armed all the time. Then it's the questions and clues regarding the Deep Ones that only make your fear grow. Hearing their intense growls from the caverns below, seeing the Daedric writing in their Bible, wondering where the other books belonging to the Moslin family are, everything builds up and creates a really tense and unsettling environment. The next quest on this list, and potentially a controversial one, is the Dark Brotherhood's Following a Lead. This is one of the final quests for the faction. It takes place after the Purification and right after the quest, A Kiss Before Dying. It begins with Lucien Lachance rushing in after the player has successfully slayed Ungolem. He first accuses you of being the traitor, and then realizes that you have no clue what's actually going on. The dead drops he's been leaving for you are being swapped out for alternate ones. These alternates are in fact leading you to kill high-ranking members of the faction, the latest one, Ungolem, being the listener. Lucien gives you a plan of action, while he himself goes into hiding, as the Black Hand are currently out looking for him. The plan leads you to Anvil, where you catch Enelroth swapping out the dead drops. Confronting him shows that he's just a pawn, and that the real traitor lives in the lighthouse cellar. Acquiring the key from Ulfgar Fogeye and going down proves to be a horrific event. There are torn up dead bodies of both animals and people littered around the room. Rotten body parts are thrown around and blood is pooled on the floors and walls. The next room over contains more bodies, a severed head, and a diary. Reading the diary, it doesn't name who the killer is, just that they have some serious psyche issues. Their thoughts are horrific and scary, and the severed head belongs to their mother. They talk to it and frequently consult it for advice. The diary proves that Lucien isn't the killer though, and upon reporting back to him at Applewatch, the player comes across the next grave scene. Lucien has been strung up, ripped into, stabbed, mutilated, defiled, and killed. The Black Hand got to him first, and his body is now a horror show. The quest ends by speaking with Arquin, and the remaining 5 of you seek out the Night Mother in Breville. Before, I mentioned that Following a Lead was perhaps a bit controversial for this list. The reason I said that is because while it certainly has a shock factor to it, some might not consider it spooky. This is the second last quest for the faction, and by now, the player could have likely become desensitized to a lot of the guild's unsettling tasks and imagery. The Dark Brotherhood in of itself is a mysterious and sinister organization. While very fun and enjoyable, I would argue that most of the quests have a tense and disturbing overtone to them, and Following a Lead begins the story's climax. Hearing that you've actually been killing Dark Brotherhood members, discovering the traitor's lair beneath the lighthouse and the terrifying scenes that came with it, learning about their mind and how long they've been planning their attack, to seeing Lucien Lachance, the member and mentor the player has grown the closest to, brutally murdered and splayed out, in my eyes is deserving of a spot on the list for Oblivion's spookiest quests. It might not be jump scare or unnerving spooky, but it's a built up and well played out thriller and mystery type of scary. For the 5th and final quest on this list, I wanted to include something unique and more low key that wouldn't necessarily come to mind right away. Oblivion has nothing short of pop cultural relevant enemies within it, including skeletons, zombies, and vampires. The last of which, in my eyes, carry darker story-driven elements to them. Becoming a vampire isn't a decision to be taken lightly. Reversing the transformation can be difficult, and the lifestyle surrounding it leads to an outcasted life. The 5th quest on the list today, while perhaps seeming a little surface level, is Darkness Eternal. Again, this one is exclusive to the Dark Brotherhood faction and can be accessed after completing the quest, The Assassinated Man. Darkness Eternal is very short, and it's brought on by Vicente Valtieri in the Shadenhall Sanctuary. Vicente is a vampire, and he doesn't shy away from it. He makes it clear that his undead urges come second to the guild's needs. Once the Assassinated Man is complete, and the player then receives new contracts from Mochiva, Vicente will bring up the Dark Gift. He'll mention that he likes to give this power to those who he deems fit, and you exemplify strong character. Accepting the invitation to become a vampire, Vicente tells you to go to sleep in the sanctuary, and he'll visit in order to infect you. The unsettling and scary part of this quest are all of the messages that you receive during the transition to full vampire. It takes 3 in-game days for porphyric hemophilia to set in. During those days, and well after becoming a creature of the night, horrifying and disturbing messages appear after waking up. To be clear, these messages appear even if the player contracted the disease through a fight, but Darkness Eternal leads you to believe that vampirism is more than it's cracked up to be, as Vicente neglects to tell you the scary parts. To cherry pick the worst messages, and there's a lot, you dream of someone sleeping peacefully in his bed when a shadowy, gaunt figure silently enters the room. Approaching the bed, the figure leans down and sinks its fangs into the sleeping person. After a few moments, the pale figure rises, blood dripping down his/her chin as color flows back into the vampire's face and his/her features fill out. You recognize the face as your own. You awake screaming. You dream of walking through the cool night air. Your body cries for blood, having not fed for days. Weakly, you stumble to a small pool. As you bend down to it, you see that it's not water in the pool, but warm fresh blood, steam rising off of it. You lower your head to drink, but cannot open your mouth, as you realize in horror that your lips have been sewn shut. A pair of cold white hands reach out from the pool and draw you under. In your dream, you approach a vampire ancient. Having just completed a perilous task for him, you swell with pride, sure that he will now bestow even greater power upon you. The entire clan's eyes are upon you. Walking towards the dais where he stands, you realize that your task for him is actually unfinished, and that all of your vampiric powers have left you. You cry out as the clan descends upon you, and the ancient's fangs rip into the flesh of your throat. In your dream, you open your eyes to a beautiful blue sky. The sun is bright, but you feel cool, even a bit damp. You draw a breath, but begin to cough, as you expel blood and dirt that you've inhaled into your lungs. As you try to draw another, you see a shovel of dirt being emptied onto your face. The sunlight grows fainter as you view it through the soil that covers your body. You would scream, but your mouth fills with dirt before you can make a sound. In a dream from your childhood, you remember playing hiding games with your young friends on a warm summer afternoon. You hide in your parents' barn, sure you will not be found. Soon, the sweet smell of hay is replaced by a darker, sickly smell. You move deeper into the barn only to stumble on the rotting corpses of your parents, their throats ripped out. You try to scream as your parents rise and pull you into an embrace. There's certainly some horrifying imagery and wordplay within these messages. It feels as though the developers really wanted to drive home the point that vampirism and the whole transformation process is a painful and disturbing one, both physically and mentally. The creatures of the night are tormented, and this dark gift, as Vicente calls it, is actually an evil curse. It's almost as if the host knows that they're an abomination of nature and a spawn of evil, yet can do nothing to change themselves back. Vampires in of themselves struggle to ward off their beastly and inhumane urges, feeding off of living humanoids. Some try to blend into society, while others simply dwell in the depths of dungeons and ruins. Darkness Eternal is the perfect definition of a quest that leads you to believe one thing, when in reality, you're going to be experiencing another. Those dreams and visions of being buried alive, ripped and cut into, tormented and tortured are all perfect ways to describe the new vampire feelings. With that, thus concludes the list of Oblivion's 5 spookiest quests. I did try to switch things up and keep the ideas and conversation fresh with some of these entries. Otherwise, honorable mentions would go to the Forlorn Watchman, the Sunken One, Order of the Virtuous Blood, the Ghost Ship of Anvil, and Caught in the Hunt. Until next time, keep on adventuring.